Hello and welcome to our second edition this year of our Tech Recruiting Academy series called How to Recruit. Thanks for joining. The basic idea of this format is really simple, and I think it's just bringing two worlds together, bridging two worlds. There's the developer world, there's the company world outside. There's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of stereotypes. And that is why we invented this format, and we always invite someone from the developer side and someone from the recruiting and HR side. And I'm really excited to have the amazing Hang Lee as co-host back. He was traveling a lot during the last weeks. I really missed him. It was very difficult to get in contact with him, and I didn't want to bother him as well. And Judy Burchell from JetBrains and Eve Grind from Maven. So hello, and wonderful that you have you here. Before we really jump in, and before I would ask Judy and Eve to give us a quick introduction on themselves, dear audience, please use the LinkedIn comment section. I mean, that's the way how we could communicate. We're really open for all your comments, for all your ideas and thoughts, and we will grab it directly and move it directly, put it directly into our discussion. So please use it extremely heavily and make it as interactive as possible. And now, Judy and Eve, could you please give a quick introduction yourself?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in first. So, hi, I'm Jody. I've been working as a data scientist for around 8 years. And prior to that, I had an academic background. So I'm currently working in developer advocacy at JetBrains. And we can talk more about that role, which is a little bit of a sideline and something quite new to data science. But previous to that, I'd sort of worked my way up from, getting into data science out of an academic career. And I was working as a lead data scientist at an ad tech company. So I've worked quite a bit on both sides, obviously being hired, but also a little bit of doing hiring as well.
Thank you very much, Judy. Eve.
Perfect intro. So my name is Eve. I have my own firm called Maven. I've worked in big technology firms for quite a few years. First from a software engineering angle, and then later jumped into, for instance, leading all proactive hiring for the machine learning arm to McKinsey. And out of my own firm, I more often than not hire senior data scientists or leadership or technical leadership within data science as well.
Cool. Thanks, Eve. Hang, now I drop the ball to you because I know that you have had so many time now to think about really incredible questions. So,
mate, if you drop the ball at me, man, guarantees the ball's going to be dropped again. But folks, welcome everybody to this conversation, and it is a conversation. It's not a webinar, and this conversation is public and open to everyone. So please feel free, if you're watching this sort of publicly on LinkedIn, make sure you comment and get involved in our chat. Particularly as we've got really quite a rare opportunity to really explore the relationships that we have between the data science community and the recruitment community. A couple of facts for us that we all need to know. Obviously, data science has been hugely in demand in terms of a recruitment demand over the last several years. We can go back decades on this. This has been a shortfall of talent for a long period of time. But obviously, since sort of the game-changing move OpenAI did by releasing ChatGPT, it's completely opened up it's kind of pushed the accelerator down in terms of how we actually sort of how many of these people we need to be recruiting on our businesses. That increases the noise level, that increases the activity, that increases, shall we say, the encounters that recruiters have with data science people. So let's explore the nature of these encounters, what goes right, what goes wrong, and we'll see what's what. So Jody, go to you straight away. When we throw the term recruiter, float that into your mind, or when you're in spaces with other DS people and the word recruiter comes up, what kind of things do people talk about? What's this general sentiment? What's the general sort of feeling that your community has with the recruitment community?
Yeah, so I think like with any field of recruitment, the experiences vary wildly. So I've been I get contacted by many recruiters. I think this is like typical of anyone who's senior in a tech role. some of those contacts are really, really good. And the person has clearly taken the time to not only understand the field, but understand my experience. So it always warms my heart when I get a message when someone has actually gone through and mentioned some of the jobs that I've done. And, I can see how it would relate to the role that they're suggesting. There's also a lot of noise, and this, I think, can maybe sour the relationship a little bit. You get people who haven't bothered doing their research. They clearly don't understand the field. They will suggest roles to you which are wildly inappropriate. Like, I've had many data engineering roles suggested to me, and I'm definitely not working in that field. So I'd say it's a real mixed bag. I have worked once with a recruiter for a role. I didn't end up taking that role. It was a generally quite positive experience. She was a good advocate between me and the company. But yeah, generally, I would say most of the interaction tends to be through LinkedIn messages, and I would say at this point, I only reply to the ones where I can see they've taken the time to do the research.
Okay, so first point, really interesting. Thank you, Jody. The kind of lack of research. How do you know that's the case? Like, what are the clear signals that this person hasn't done their research?
Yeah, so maybe to just kind of give the lay of the land in data science, because I think it's really confusing for people coming in from the outside. So when I started, back in the dark age in data science, it was, I would say, a much broader term than it is now. So it used to be this catch-all term, it was sort of like 80% of us had PhDs. We were expected to basically be these unicorns, which is absolutely stupid. Like, you're expected to be a researcher and also be able to deploy and maintain your solutions, which very rarely I've seen people who can do that. So as the field has matured, what we're actually seeing is a lot of subspecializations, not just in data science, but also in related data fields. So BI analysts, they were always there. They continue to be there. There's this fuzzy group called data analysts, not very well defined, but it's a bit of a catch-all term for anyone who can do exploratory data analysis processes and maybe some research with data. Then you have your core data scientists. As it's kind of defined now, it's the people you will be hiring to do, I think, more kind of solutions in your company. Like, maybe they can optimize some sort of processes, or they can develop R&D. Like, you want them to do some sort of innovation based on data, but they're more going to still be a research role. You've then got your ML engineers. There's a branch of engineering which is dedicated to deploying and maintaining machine learning solutions in production, which is very difficult and quite complicated. And then you've got your data engineers who are responsible for supplying the data, not just for the research side, but also for feeding it into these deployed solutions. So one of the first flags for me when someone does not understand my experience, is I am a data scientist. My background is like academic social sciences, and this is my happy spot. I have some experience in natural language processing as well, and I've got some experience with like ad tech. So if I get jobs that are in this wheelhouse, and maybe they'll mention, hey, that recommender that you built would be relevant to this job, or I don't know, the NLP work that you did would be relevant. I'm like, cool, I can see that you actually understand. I get a lot of jobs where people are like, hey, we're looking for a data engineer. Do you want that job? And I'm like, I'm not going to pass the first interview. Like, this is a waste of time for everyone. So these are the sort of hits you get.
Right. So Jody, that's a really, I mean, you've just actually almost like, as you were describing, I was visualizing how a function might actually be structured. But essentially, your experience has been a lot of people will create the big bucket data science, and they confuse the roles between them. They don't understand the definition. And the function has matured as well. Let's also be fair on this. It's obviously increased, it's matured, it's grown. There's different specializations, and now we've got the roles that are actually very different, or at least we can call them adjacent, let's say. But they're different enough for people not to identify as that person. So if you get that wrong, then you're in a situation where immediately, what are we even talking about? Eve, you want to say something here?
Yeah, I think I would like to add to it. I think it's really great points raised already, but I think what also is important is the maturity phase of the company that a certain individual is working in, because Jody is likely used to a more mature company setup where she can zone in on the work she loves to do, and she gets support from the team members who know their trade of the craft. Sometimes you speak to people in startups, and no fault to them, they just have, maybe they're understaffed, maybe there's not a lot of budget for hiring. They still want to push your model out. It needs to live in production. It needs to connect through APIs. And all of a sudden, there's also a bunch of data sources that come in, and you need to manage them. And then your job gets to be blurry and very busy also. So it's kind of almost unfair, because that person might want to be where Jody's at, focusing on going from feature engineering to staging these models, and that's where they want to be, but maybe that's what's prohibiting them. So I think there's an element of where are you, what maturity phase your company lives in, versus how much can you focus on the role you'd love to be in the first place.
Yeah, really. Go ahead, Jody.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I absolutely totally agree. And that was the one thing I forgot to mention. Something I would say is that if you want to recruit for someone to do that sort of role, please don't pick a poor junior to do it. Like, they might be able to keep up with everything, great learning curve for them, but they're going to be stressed out of their brain. So if you want someone who can do everything, you're better off picking at least a mid-level to a senior data scientist.
And Jody, that actually might suit some people. I mean, there are some folks that actually see themselves as a do everything, and we're gonna crack through. They want to have the full responsibility for. Maybe they wouldn't operate well in a big corp environment or a big research environment because of their desire to do up and down, left and right, everything. But that person does exist. Again, it reminds me of tech. Back in the early 2000 era. Where it's pre-cloud, you get to the situation where you have multiple layers of server administrators and multiple database people and network folks and all this. But then you have one guy that wants to feels he does everything. It's like, no, I don't want all these people. I'll do it all. So there is that situation, but it's quite important for you as a recruiter to identify what is the environment you're recruiting into. So, for instance, one of the conversations, folks, if you're having a requisition meeting, is to exactly have this conversation. How many people are going to be working with this person? What is the size of the department? What is the range of responsibilities? Is it a narrow role? In which case, let's clearly define what that is. Is it a broad role? In which case, let's define what those responsibilities are. So all of this should be material for you to have a better conversation with the hiring manager.
And maybe to add to this, not only the hiring manager, but let's say you get a request in. I run my own shop, so sometimes founders or venture capitalist firms will check in with me to see if they can scale a company out. And there's all these great ideas about, here's a bunch of money, let's make things work. And especially with generative AI coming into the mix, data science has been around for a while. Jody gave a good little backstory on it, but especially now, there's so much focus on, let's call it the hype, right? And let's see who survives. So right now, there's so much focus on it. There will be an equilibrium at one point of the companies who have received funding were unable to crack the nut in production maybe and not make the amount of money they wanted. They'll die out. But for now, there's tons of investors that want to get in on this and put their money in there and see return on investment. So for you as a recruiter, also, you speak to candidates. It's important that you qualify them and use their time efficiently. But on the other end, when you qualify yourself for a job, makes sense you understand how a business wants to scale and what makes sense in the first place. Because if they think they can just chuck in, as to Jody's point, one not so senior data scientist who now has to do everything, what's that going to be like? And that's never going to be very successful. So self-qualification goes in multiple directions as your recruiter, perhaps. And also when you're a data scientist thinking to join a company, what's that setup like? Think business-wise, not just the technical implementation. What is that company doing and how do they want to scale?
Very interesting. Go ahead, Rudy.
I have one point in mind. How important, what difference does it make if companies from their company culture, because I mean every company has got this culture is coming from somewhere, has already established a kind of a data-driven mindset in the organization, so that kind of decisions are taken on data-driven basis. Does that support kind of the talk to get these people on board? Or because what I personally meet quite often is either companies are really taking all the decisions on on data-driven basis, or the opposite. They're just doing it because of having no data and using no data and taking all the decisions on a kind of a gut feeling thing or experience that they made from the market knowledge or whatever they are driven by.
You've actually touched on one of my hot points, which is, so this was much worse, I think, back when I started working in data science. But the thing is, you should not employ a data scientist until you have usable data. I know this sounds extremely dumb and obvious, but a lot of companies don't understand that you can't just hire a data scientist and all of a sudden you'll have, new IP that's going to make you billions. It's a very dirty, concrete process. And the first step is literally being able to access the data. And I don't just mean from a technical perspective. There may be problems with understanding what the data means. There may be problems with how the data was encoded. So there may actually be huge problems, which mean you can't use it for modeling because it's been contaminated in some way. But it can also be like, I had a situation at one of my jobs, which I've always worked, as you've picked up, in larger companies. This company was an amalgamation of quite a few different companies across different parts of Europe. And we could not access the data from the UK and Germany because there was just some sort of legal issue. So the only way we were able to get it was the data scientists in the UK downloading it and then sneakily sending it to us. We weren't really meant to have it, but everyone kind of looked the other way. So it's sort of like, okay, you have this vision for this product that you want to build, but from a logistical and a technical point of view and like a legal point of view, can your team actually even access the data? If they can't, employ some data engineers first would be my advice, and try and work out what the hell is going on with your data situation.
Thanks.
It's actually an interesting, I mean, it may not be the right scope for this conversation, but if you were to build a data science division from scratch, like what is the order in which you actually structure that that department? Would be quite an interesting thing to try. Eve, you definitely want to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah, go Eve.
I'll leave this to the group, but I think it's such a good point that Jody is raising, and I think sometimes I'll take a recruitment analogy here for a moment. Sometimes companies will view a sourcer as a step up to becoming a full recruiter, right? And first you figure out how to generate leads, and then later in time, maybe you're lucky enough where you can do all the rest of the work. That's sometimes a misconception. Strong data pipelining is really important to doing a good job as a data scientist. Arguably, the same thing applies in recruiting. So sometimes you see in market that the market is pushing people with a technical background, for instance, a computer science, computer engineering degree, into data science, right? Because that's where all funky stuff happens. Yet solid data engineers who are senior and manage to stay on the data engineering side are incredibly rare to find and have so much value to Jody and many people alike that I think that's such a strong topic. So I just want to make this statement more to the people who are watching and thinking about how to grow their career. Don't think you necessarily need to be on the data science side to do very well for yourself, because the solid data engineering foundation, so the mapping and the ingestion piece and where do all these features even originate from, creating clarity in that for Jody to even be able to do her work is incredibly important.
Yeah, and like it's to the point where, like, I don't want to devalue my own work, but I would say you need, depending on the size and the complexity of your data, you need like 2 to 5 data engineers for every data scientist, because you don't just produce data in your company for your data science team. In fact, we're often not the main consumer. So basically, really, you need a strong team of data engineers who can manage like living data coming in, who can store it in a way that's accessible, that can store it in a way that's affordable. If you've got really big data, it gets expensive. Shall we come back to the question about building a data team, or do we want to stay on data engineering? I'm happy with either.
No, I think what you explained for me is the kind of a problem, and that would probably bring me to my next question that I have in mind is, how good are companies? Because I think that's probably what we are discussing right now is probably coming from a point that I see how good are companies in really describing the project and the problems?
Yeah, this actually,
I mean,
yeah.
I think it's to hire a data analyst. I mean, that's or the data scientists. I mean, that is. I mean, everybody tries to do that because I think it's a little bit. You need to use AI at the moment, so you need to probably have a data scientist in your team as well because everybody has got one. But I think it needs to be extremely. I think for me, it means I need to understand the problem and need to describe the problem, and then I'm able probably to find the right team and the right solution. And that is probably why we discussed it right now. How good are companies in describing the problems and understanding the problem and describing it?
It's actually a very interesting point you bring up, because I was going to say, like, in terms of building an ideal data team, the first thing you start with always is the problem you want to solve. And this is like also like people ask me a lot about like AI coding assistants as well. And I will give the same answer that I give with AI coding assistants. Developers, data scientists, if you think your job is writing code or writing algorithms or training models, you've misunderstood your job. The job is to solve business problems. And that's across like all of the engineering teams. The tools that we use to solve it are technical tools. But at the end, our value that we add to the company is being able to solve business problems. So I think if you don't even have problems to solve, or you can't clearly articulate them, you're not at the point where you need to employ technical staff.
And maybe to second this, also what I see happening loads in interviewing. So the first basic split that maybe you can make even before this, Jody, you come with a research background, I believe, is do you want to live in research or do you want to take this into a production setting, right? Let's start there perhaps. But once you've made the deliberate decision to go away from research and into for profit, if you will, then the scoping element, so you can practice all the technical elements of your job, but I see people failing more often than not on the ability to scope out a project well. And for every job, whether that's in core software engineering, whether that's for any technical job as well, sometimes technical people forget that communication really, and it sounds again so cliche, but cliches are alive because they are usually true, is because scoping out a problem means communicating with stakeholders who might not have a technical background, who want to explain to them what the problem is, where they want to go. And if you can't bridge that gap, you're always left with a problem not speaking the same language. So incredibly important, but also an incredibly underrated skill sometimes that I see people failing at during interviews.
More to the point, I'm going to go even stronger than that. I would actually say a core part of a data scientist job, especially as you go into mid and senior levels, is interpreting what business people tell you into a data science problem. Because you're a scientist. That is actually what science is. You take some sort of vague problem and you interpret it in such a way that it can be tested using data or assessed or how to have a product built from it, however you want to kind of conceptualize that. But it's not building models. It's like, and then there's the reason that the cliche is that 80% of the work with data science is cleaning the data. It's because it's really like these are fundamental skills, like sort of doing the groundwork, understanding the problem, understanding the data, building the cool model. That's the last 20%.
Okay, folks, quick one to everyone who's watching this here. Let me know whether this is either educational for you, intimidating for you. Like, what is your general sense when you're hearing all of this? I want to know. I mean, I'll give you my impression, right? I mean, I'm hugely educated by this. I'm fascinated, but I'm also now kind of thinking, you know what? I need to know so much more about this domain before I even step foot into the recruitment world. And maybe there immediately is where one of the more persistent problems that we might encounter in let's say our more challenging relationships with different domains is that it's a very young. Oftentimes, recruitment can be a very young industry, particularly when it comes into that first contact, first outreach, and oftentimes that young person is 6 months away from being a credible recruiter, let's say, or they're 12 months away from being a credible recruiter, but being thrown in there and they're swimming as hard as they can. So that is not a kind of an excuse for bad behavior. It doesn't really help the marketplace in any way. But it is an opportunity, I think, for more experienced recruiters to differentiate themselves from that mass that is out there that is, trying to get in, I guess, onto this domain. Okay, let's keep going with this. In fact, no, let's reverse the theme just a little bit. Just Jody, I hope you don't mind if I ask Eve a few questions on this. So you're a recruiter, man, and you're recruiting these data scientists, data engineers, whatever they may be, whatever category they've got. Are there any like consistent themes that emerge from your experience that you think, like, why are they doing that? This is annoying. This does not help them. It doesn't help me. Why? What is the confusion, Eve?
In their working experience, for instance, as I asked them through the experiences they've had, because I can name a clear one that often comes by, and that's maybe, I'm not sure if people have read this very old article from Joel Swarovski, which is called "Don't Jump the Hype Train," and often than not, you see this applies in many different fields, such as the world of advanced machine learning and modeling and everything around it is overcomplicating solutions. There's so many interesting things that you can model, and you can build a deep neural network of many different things if you'd like. The question is your client going to be satisfied with doing this? So I can have an incredibly complex car to get me from A to B, but if a bike does the same thing and it's sunny outside, do you have to spend all that money to use that car and consume all the fuel, et cetera, et cetera? Sometimes the same thing applies to data science. So even for very senior roles, sometimes I interview someone and I ask myself the question, is this not overcomplicating the solution for just building something fancy? And I see Jody nodding there quite a lot, but that's the first thing that often I see with candidates. Maybe it's sometimes to also come with something that potentially impresses me, but I'm very much impressed with the fit solution to a set problem that makes sense in the real world. And for certain clients that I have, yes, they are doing very bleeding edge, very complex technology on the research side. And that's where the nth degree of research and complex modeling does take place. But don't try and do it when X amount of problems can be solved with a regression or classification, and you'd be fine. Do
you know what? That's actually a really important point, because for anybody who's in the field, in the data science field, watching this and maybe on the job market or looking for future opportunities at some of the future state, it might well be worth bearing in mind that some recruiters, at least, may have developed the perception that you're impractical. If I can, if that's a really concise way to say it. So the first thing to do then, if you're, let's say, transitioning from an academic setting to a more commercial setting, is to think about, okay, can you demonstrate practicality? And one of the things in which how you demonstrate practicality is to think of an example of a problem where there was a significant constraint that created a suboptimal outcome. But you know what? That's what business is. It's like, it's never perfect. There's always some constraint that causes you not to have a perfect situation. But you know what? You've got to push it out. You've got to ship it. So that would be, maybe that's the example you elevate to bullet point number one, rather than, that 3-year research piece you did that, created this breakthrough. That's great for academia, but not necessarily good if you're trying to break into commercial. Is that good advice, Jody, would you say?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with what you've said. When I was interviewing in my last role, we had candidates who looked incredible on paper, but you would get, one of the interview questions we actually asked them was, we gave them a data set, like just some summary statistics. We asked them to describe potential problems that they saw, just basic data screening. And then we asked, which is the first model you would build and why? And the answer really that I was looking for was linear regression, because it could be solved with linear regression and it's a good first pass. But it's about scoping, and it's about doing the minimal solution. And it's also about disabusing yourself of the notion that you cannot time box research. You absolutely can. And if you're an academic, you have to do this when you write grants. So it's very cheeky for academics to say, oh, I can't time box this, when you promise your grants committee that you can. So yeah, you need to be practical, and you need to, I would say actually, when you're putting together CVs, I don't know if you would agree with this, Eve, but bullet point things where you can show the commercial value. Like if you can say, I increased the number of customer acquisition by 500 people a month, or I save the company 10%, they're amazing selling points because you show your value.
Mhm.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's actually really what we often seek in resumes as well. I mean, I'll try and get many data sources, not just the stuff that people have been sending over in case they do apply. Most of the stuff I do is proactive and I end up sourcing people, but still. Very strong point about time boxing things. But again, think about the reality of a company, right? It's never perfect, as Hung Lee said. You're going to get business restraints. You're going to have investors who want to pull a minimum viable product out there to users, right? If you don't get users, you don't get more data, better data for even a data science to work with. So often you see that early stage companies are seeking for ways to get to market as quickly as possible, getting that data in from the users that they want to be attracting. So having the ability to not overcomplicate things and start with a minimal viable product from a technical perspective also that will get you in some influx is far better than going for the Rolls Royce of solutions whilst 80-90% of companies don't need it. So you're actually counterproductive at that point, and you cost more time equals more money equals more headcount if you count it all up that could have been spent on other people helping you, such as a strong data engineer to alleviate Jody's problems.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And by the way, folks, thanks for your comments in there. I would just say, if you have any questions for either Eve, Jody, or Rudy, or myself, use the comment feature on LinkedIn. Just pop them in there. And we've got a team actually monitoring that, and we're going to go to those questions towards the end of this session. Okay. So make sure you make use of that sort of feature on LinkedIn. Just comment your question in, and we'll get to them in the end. Okay. Let's talk about sort of the sort of recruiter behaviors that ultimately cause a professional to disengage from a process. So we talked already about just the lack of domain knowledge, lack of personal research on, you know, the individual experience that you've got. What other behaviors have you come across, Jody, either as a person or as a representative or a connector to a community that seems to be quite prevalent that actually recruiters need to desist from? Because I think that's going to be useful information for us here.
Yeah, I can also, because again, I haven't worked too much with recruiters, but obviously I've interviewed for quite a lot of jobs at this point in my career. So I can also talk about red and green flags maybe that I've had with the interviewing process. So I would say for me, cultural fit is super, super important. And I would say just, you know, having your messages responded to in a timely fashion. I will do that because I'm trying to be professional. I would just sort of expect the same. I would just sort of say just being friendly and nice and not sort of, if I express any hesitations about the job, I would sort of expect an honest answer. I'm not going to be an asshole about it, but you know, if I ask a genuine question like, hey, I see that maybe your funding situation is not entirely clear. Could you tell me more about that? I would expect an honest answer. I kind of do expect if we're going to meet that you have read my CV beforehand because I will have done extensive research on your company. So I expect it to be a two-way street. I did once join an interview where he was literally reading my CV as we started. Then he clearly didn't like what he saw and he couldn't keep it off his face. So that was not a great experience. And yeah, I think it's just sort of having an interview process that's sensible. You know, we all want to make sure that we've assessed each other comprehensively. I think it's extremely, extremely important to assess for cultural fit. I think assessing technical fit is easier than you might imagine. There are definitely some minimum things you would expect data scientists to know, and I can talk more about them if you're interested. But I don't mind doing them because I don't have kids and I don't have like extensive obligations outside work, but doing really long take homes, this can actually screen out a lot of candidates. Your candidates with carer duties or they travel a lot or other things. You could lose some good candidates because of it. Expecting 7 rounds of interviews, especially if you take a long time to schedule them. This is not a good experience for candidates. So just try to make sure you get a good fit on both sides. I've been responsible for hiring not a great fit, and I know the consequences of it, but also try to be respectful of the candidate's time as well.
Yeah, I think that's a classic, isn't it? I mean, the provisioning of a take-home exercise or something to prove, I guess, whether the person has got the capability. That's really got to be carefully managed. Whether that is actually an assessment process that we need to really fundamentally rethink. Because it's also not scalable, right? I mean, you might be able to distribute that to 100 people, but that's, you're going to hire 100 individuals. So it's actually a very inefficient way to get the person you want. You're kind of just offloading that inefficiency to the candidate, which doesn't seem particularly fair to me at all. Yeah, interesting. Couple more things, Jody, to help you, to help me kind of better understand this. Is there like any type of information that's quite important to provision in different stages of the process? So, for instance, some types of candidate, again, let's use huge generalization, huge broad brush on this. Some types of candidates just want to jump straight into a synchronous call and just let's hammer this out and talk it through. Other candidates, actually, they're quite standoffish. They want give me all the information first and then let me come to you when I'm ready. How would you be prepared to sort of describe a persona that I think would be a decent default for recruiters to go with when it comes to the amount of information, when, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So okay, I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to bring up salary. I'm going to go with, I understand sort of being coy about salary, but it can be really frustrating when you're talking to someone about a job that sounds good. Salaries, particularly in Europe, can vary wildly for the same job. So I'm in Germany, and you can have very traditional German companies, and they will pay like a full 40 grand less for the same job than maybe a more internationally focused company. And you don't always know this up front. You don't always know who the client is if the recruiter is contacting you. You can't necessarily gauge that yourself. So it is helpful to at least know if you're in the same ballpark about salary up front. And it puts a bit of a bad taste in a lot of technical people's mouths if they have to be the one who names the salary, because it's this awful feeling where you get you're not sure if you're going to completely embarrass yourself by naming something that's way too high, or if you're going to cheat yourself out of money by naming something that's too low. So I would love it if this was discussed up front. I can see Eve wants to jump in. I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, I want to join in. Yeah, because I want to make it easier. Yeah, I want to make it easier for everyone, because it is a bit of a difficult topic, right? But what I always do is I take the complexity away from the candidate or the person who's even remotely interested. So first off, let's go back to the coming prepared. I always send a pitch document where I explain everything about the role with the hiring manager. Also shows that in case there's an agency reaching out, how serious, do you really have a foot in the door there of placing that person? Or is this a happy-go-lucky, if you find a good candidate, you can send it over? Try and make that estimation what type of recruiter you have in front of you to all the technical folks. But once you're in that call, I take it away from them salary-wise, and I go, listen, I'm not here to negotiate. This is not you pinning yourself to a number. We do have a set range in mind, but here comes the important part. I'd be very disrespectful if now I assume you should be only making this amount of money. Why? I haven't interviewed you yet, so I don't know what your performance level will be. I can't calibrate you based on the back of one individual conversation, or even a couple, if we haven't really formally interviewed you yet, on how you stack up against the maturity level of said technical people in the company you represent. So it's actually downright disrespectful, in my opinion, if you make it come across that if you have a set number in mind. Sure, there is a range in mind for a certain job, but you should position it completely differently. And then if you hear a number that's an outlier, look back into that resume and go, what I've just learned in the past 30 minutes, maybe that justifies a higher salary. Maybe the impact and remit of that person was much higher. I still would maybe really want to hire that person. Go back to your hiring manager and talk about the fact you found an incredible lead, but it comes at a different cost. That may be from an HR perspective, repurposing headcount, making 2 into 1, and hiring a great technical leader, even if a person is so senior. But don't make it a complex topic for somebody to guess. Am I pinning myself to a number? Am I grossly underestimating or overestimating? That is awkward. Don't do that.
Yeah.
I think salary is a difficult topic for almost everyone to deal with, including recruiters. By the way, when you negotiate your own salary, suddenly it becomes difficult, isn't it, folks? It's easy when you're representing someone else or you're doing whatever, but it is an intimate story. It's very tied, a bit of information, very clearly tied to you. Sadly enough, there is judgment attached to the number that you have, good or bad, high or low. These things are kind of floating around there. So emotionally very difficult. And it could well be someone who's, let's say, operating in one domain, academic domain, let's say, moving into a commercial domain, actually is even less sure, because we don't know what the pay numbers are. We don't know how it works. Maybe negotiation doesn't work the same way. All of those things occur. So a recruiter could really do a fantastic job there and improve their kind of relationship with the candidate if you're able to simply come out first with the ranges and not waste everyone's time. Okay, cool. We've got about 15 minutes to go, but we're going to go to questions in about 10 minutes, folks. So you've got 5 minutes to ask more questions. So comment on the LinkedIn thread. We're going to go through them one by one. Rudy, you about to say something?
I have one question in mind, because we know from our latest surveys, and we're doing a quick developer survey every year. And from the last one, from which we did last year, there was one kind of result which didn't surprise me, but it fits to the salary discussion that we're having right now. That 43% of all the developers mentioned that they would take a job, even if it's lower paid, if the company would be able to offer kind of a career path, educational path, and as data scientist area is a kind of a quick emerging one. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. How important is it to also outline as a company in the interviews all these kind of aspects? And this is probably a question to both of you.
I think, Eve, I can see you want to go, so you jump in.
I just think it's, this is again one of these things, self-assessing an opportunity as a technical person out there going to market is, you've been studying for a long time. You're in a technical trade. You enjoy doing research, whether that's for a production purpose or staying in research. And now all of a sudden there's a company who tends to not even speak about your natural, and companies want it, right? They want naturally persons who are interested in doing research, staying on top of the latest market developments. But all of a sudden, when now a person comes back to a company and says, but where's my progression into my career? How can you help me get to that next level? How can they're basically implicitly asking, how can I create a bigger impact for your company by helping me with XYZ educational goals? And then there's silence. It always baffles me. I think I'm an ex-HR manager who moved into recruiting, but what I think is also really poor recruiting is if you hire somebody for a bum in a seat now instead of a career. You're getting someone in, you invest a lot of time equals money again in getting that person ranked to the point where they can be really productive in a company. Having people leave the company because of a poor employee experience at the end of it and feeling they're always contributing but never receiving in return, it doesn't need to be from a monetary perspective. That largely comes down to actually the other factors about being treated as such, where there's enough budget and time available for somebody to become even better at their craft, and them leaving. Now, I'm not sure if you've Googled the price of a hire who actually looked really great on paper and who's left you, even though they could have been high performing. That can be a killer to companies, especially when they're early stage startups. So it's incredibly important, and it's a really good selection question. If you're a data scientist or anyone alike, talking to companies is how do they really treat your employee cycle, and how do they work the performance cycle? What is expected? Talk me through some examples. Really helpful.
Judy, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's not even the career progression, although that's important. Just also touching on the career progression. this is a problem in data science as in development, but I think it's even more immature in data science. There are not that many lead or senior data scientists, I would say, like compared to in development. And so no one really thinks about the idea of the technical leadership path versus the managerial leadership path. And I've done the managerial leadership path briefly. I don't think it was a good fit for me, but it's sort of an assumption that if you're senior enough and you're good at the communication thing, because you should be as a data scientist, you can also do the HR management. So that's sort of one important thing to think about. And I have seen some more mature companies doing this, but a lot of companies are thinking about it for their developers, but not thinking about it for their data scientists because their data science teams are frankly too small. Now, the other point I kind of wanted to make, and I think Eve touched on this really nicely, the idea of being a researcher forever. It doesn't mean that you're impractical, but it does sort of have the implication that if you hire a data scientist, you have someone who you expect can think for themselves, and you expect that they're going to be able to do some innovation. So it may be that you're working on a project, but you see something in the data and you're like, I think there's potential there for a new product or a new, like some sort of improvement we could do. Having a company that won't have your back and they're like, whatever, you don't get to suggest the work, this comes from the top. Well, don't hire data scientists. Like, just, there's no point because they're going to get annoyed and leave. So yeah, that's part of it as well. Give them a bit of a leash and give them some money and a bit of faith, as long as they can scope it properly and sell the product. Sell the project. Yeah.
And maybe this ties into how to manage technical teams as well, right? Some companies struggle with the idea, but you want to hire people with a brain. And because you have them, you want to make sure that they can utilize this. So often people are micromanaging far too often. And what you get is technical people, if there's one thing on earth they get annoyed by, it's probably going to be this one, because they have a brain and they can use it. And wasn't that what you claimed in the first place when you were trying to hire them and said, are you senior enough? Can you lead projects on your... Okay, finally you have them there. Don't restrain them. Give them the room, but just be very clear about the preconditions. These are the things we value as a company. This is where you probably want to go and seek some help or alternative opinion. But in that other space, go ahead. You know, create. But that comes with maturity.
Yeah, but if that's not only valid for developer teams.
Anyone.
Yeah.
Any professional setting.
In some companies, I think that fits for the whole organization.
Yeah.
We are hiring experts and treat them as kind of
children,
small child.
Well, we laugh about it, but you'd be surprised.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it's definitely true. In the meantime, I've got two questions. One from Lucy and one from Thorsten. So probably could you grab up this question?
Sorry, Rudy, just quickly interrupt on that. I know it's a superfluous interruption, but we are now officially going to those questions. So please ask more if you want to go to them. So yeah, let's go fetch them, Rudy. Sorry, mate.
Okay, I think the first one was from Lucy. Would you ever consider to return the company you left once? Same or different role, advantages, disadvantages, knowing the background?
Do you want to go first, Eve? Because I tend to talk a lot.
No, Jody, you're more than welcome to answer. I'll follow up.
All right. I think potentially yes. I would usually say the reason that I leave a job is because I feel like I can't grow anymore in that role. And I didn't really see a way of moving into a different team. So I don't think I would ever go back to the same role. But if I could go to a different project in a company, like I had no cultural problems with any place I left. I've been quite lucky that way.
Same for me, really. If companies are big enough that there's enough challenges around, I would definitely consider them, especially if I had a good experience all around. And I've been in that position once or twice and actually opted against it simply because there was another exciting project that I wanted to learn about. For instance, I left Uber rather early on and I could have stayed for much longer, but because there was a really interesting data science specific job, I've always been building core software engineering teams. I really wanted to learn about the data side of things and the actual business value you built on top of that SWE infrastructure. That was a clear indicator of me leaving in favor of a bigger challenge. Whilst, would I consider going back to Uber, for instance? Yes, I would, because they're doing very interesting things for me from a technical perspective. I would 100% consider. I think from an individual's perspective, it's also important to never burn a bridge in a place where you've really enjoyed yourself. These are companies that will be around. You know the culture quite a bit. You can actually help people out if you would ever return. It's a very easy rehire in some cases for a company because you already know a lot of the lay of the land, even though the technology always skips a beat maybe. But, so many benefits that never burn that bridge. If you have a great place that potentially could be home again in the future, keep the door open.
Hang, have you ever been in a situation to be hired again from a company in your career?
They were too smart, mate. The legacy of my earlier performance was it closed that door like very clearly. So no, that never emerged.
Okay. There's one question from Torsten regarding the salary. Torsten, I'm not 100% sure. Probably you can drop another comment. For me, the TRL, I mean, probably for all of the rest in here is TRL is clear, but for me, it's not 100% clear. So probably you could drop another comment on what it means for you, and then we can answer that one. In the meantime, we've got one from Alona. Can you help understand where the main difference between a data scientist and applied scientist lies? It feels it can be quite depending on the company and depending on the company.
You want to go, Eve?
Yeah.
No, actually, I'm really keen to hear your comments, Jody, and I'll see if I have a different view on it. But go ahead.
I would say maybe my view is slightly more pragmatic. So a data scientist, I would say you generally hire them with the expectation that most of the time they're going to stick with fairly safe, well-proven solutions. So the project might not always work, but you're not expecting them to do like crazy cutting edge stuff. You're expecting them to build minimal viable products. You would hire, I would say, an applied scientist, an ML researcher, or these sort of roles when you're doing really crazy cutting edge things, and maybe like 20% of your projects will work out, but you're going to strike big with those. So it is a fine line, but I think it's more like you're data scientists like me. I'm not an ML researcher. I'm more interested in doing your kind of run a day, probably fairly boring, always the same models over and over again because they're tried and true. Your ML researchers are the ones who are like, oh, I'm going to download the latest like Falcon model and see if we can apply that to our work because this is the cutting edge.
With the comment again, what I made earlier about overcomplicating solutions, there's companies that need. So you make it sound boring, Jody, but you probably add tons of business value in the work that you do. Very pragmatic.
Yes.
Some of my clients are really doing what I said, the bleeding edge front line of what is Gen AI or other stuff. And that's where the amount of research you do actually boasts an amount of confidence with the companies hiring you. So there's one client that I have where if your citation level isn't above 15,000, they just wouldn't take another look, and only with a very specific part of advanced machine learning. That's just a completely different company. And usually you see these companies being larger in size with exactly to what Jody's point, because you made a great point there, is you can do a ton of research, but even if out of the 10 things you're doing, one of them holds a business impact, that you can extrapolate over a business that generates huge amounts of revenue, and there's the value in that. And often you see applied researchers being instilled in such teams, and they have a very broad remit in where that ML research can be applied in production. But it's very fair to say that there would be a team of folks like Jody around in these business teams who could then utilize that research and pull that further into production. So I think there's a really collaborative element in it, but those are necessarily not the same things from a people perspective in a company.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, now we've got some clarification. Sorry, Han, from Torsten regarding the TRL. So it's technology readiness level, and he meant it in a kind of a beginner is on 1 and the pro is on 9, and then what the salary level kind of in the EU are. Is it? I think for me, it's working in this environment for many years now. I think it's always kept like a secret. So, I mean, we're not talking about salaries in Europe. I think that's probably an issue. I mean, we have got this kind of salary regulation in Austrian law that we have to put the salary in all the job ads. But even there, the information you can drag out as a candidate is useless, because it's normally saying, okay, there's a kind of a minimum salary which is paid because of the law situation, and we are willing to overpay that, which is probably the same the same kind of nonsense that if you put nothing, it means the same from my point of view. So, Han.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I was. So, folks, we are rapidly coming to the end of this conversation. I think there's obviously so much more to say on this. I mean, as always, it's very important, I think, for everyone who's watching this and learn from our wonderful guests. Go ahead and connect with Eve and Jody. Don't go and bother them as the experts in all of this, but you know what I mean. Just by following them, you should be able to get some sort of like information ambiently with regards to how we need to behave. A couple of things I think are fairly obvious from a recruiter perspective. You know, we need to increase our knowledge level. I don't think it's that difficult to figure out exactly what a mature function, a data science function looks like, or a research function, as it might be called. What does that look like? And we need to understand people coming from a different domain, moving over. There's a different psychological makeup, and you know, we've got to take the lead in creating that confidence. So folks, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I hope this has helped. I hope this series has helped. Certainly it's been great fun to be part of. Make sure you follow WeAreDevelopers, by the way, if you want to keep this kind of learning and bridge building type of mentality. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks Eve, Jody, Rudy, wonderful to join the screen with you. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I just want to add one small thing. I hope to see all of you in Berlin, where we have this World Congress from the 17th to the 19th, and there's a kind of a real huge number of stages for developers, but there's also an massive increasing number of stages for tech recruiters, for employer branding people, and for people in the HR community. And we are bridging physically the worlds together, and we are celebrating and having a lot of fun, including drag queen karaoke, where we could all sing together, Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys. So hope to see you there. Have a nice day and nice remaining weekend. Stay tuned for the next episode. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.